want that. And no amount of relative material status is going to even come close to rectifying that. You want your conscience to be clean, clear. You want your interpersonal relationships to be honest. You want to be reliable and dependable. And if you can add exciting and adventurous to that, so much the better. But success means, to be successful means to be good.
And you say that successful means to be good. Isn't that a problem where in society, particularly our society, where people judge success, they judge it on the acquirement of property, material goods and possessions. And therefore there's that imbalance where someone can be morally good and a fantastic person, but in a materialistic society seem to be a failure because they haven't acquired a great deal.
Well, that definitely is a problem. When you have productive people, that's a problem in how it's a measurement problem in some sense. You know, economic success is generally associated with intelligence and conscientiousness. So there is a rough correlation between ability, let's say, even moral ability, and success. Now, I'm not making too much of that, but I do know, look, if you're going to be a successful businessman, especially across multiple dimensions, multiple enterprises, you bloody well better be honest, because it's going to catch up with you, man. And the probability that you're going to be a successful crook multiple times is very, very low. You can do that, but you have to move constantly, right? So your reputation doesn't keep up with you. So there is some association between success and moral virtue, thank God. But it's a rough approximation, and there's plenty of exceptions. It's very hard for creative people to monetize their productivity, for example. So you have unrewarded virtue, and that's a flaw of the monetary system. It means we haven't been able to, and you might say the same thing applies to such things as our inability to pay homemakers. Now, why don't we pay homemakers? Well, it's because what they produce isn't monetizable for 20 years. And our economic system isn't sophisticated enough to figure out how to pay people for returns that are that, pushed off into the future. That doesn't make it right, but we don't know how to fix it technically, right? I mean, if you're a venture capitalist and you want to invest in something, you want a tenfold return on your investment within a handful of years. You can't afford to invest over a 20-year period. And so that makes it really rough on homemakers because we're not sophisticated enough to monetize it. So it's a measurement problem, but unless you can figure out a better way of doing it, you're stuck with what we've got.
Do you want to promote your business to an intelligent audience who don't need to know your pronouns to buy your product?
Here at Trigonometry, we have over 250,000 subscribers across the different platforms, and we frequently get over 3 million views a month. That's a lot of new customers for your business.
We speak with some of the biggest guests from the worlds of politics, economics, journalism, arts and entertainment. All of them have spent at least 1 month in the gulag, so you don't have to.
And we'll match your product to the perfect guest for you. American sponsors will be matched with American guests, and so on. That way, you know your advert has the best possible chance of getting to the right people.
Or as we call them, the wrong people.
Advertise with us and we'll get your business cancelled or your money back.
Contact us by email at marketing@triggerpod.co.uk and we'll make your nightmares come true.
Jordan, I was going to ask you as we head towards the end of the interview, there's another issue we've been circling around, and you bring up the issue of stay-at-home mums. And I feel like this conversation by its very nature has been quite male-centric. And I said earlier, I think the whole gender wars thing and men and women competing over who's more victim, who's more this is a bit silly, because men and women need to work together and they need each other. That's how I feel.
Well, they have. Mostly.
Right. Of course. Exactly. So, but we do live in a society where I think some people don't see it that way and want to disrupt that. What do you think men and women need to do more of to coexist peacefully, if you might, or to build healthy relationships and to work together?
Well, I mean, I can only tell you what I've experienced. one thing that people aren't taught to do is to negotiate. And so that's what we need to do. Look, if you're either going to have traditional gender roles, where everybody shuts up and does what their mother did or their father did, which works as long as society isn't changing too quickly. That actually works quite well, and it's quite a relief to everyone, because how many bloody questions do you want to ask yourself? You know, like, you just have no idea how much certainty you actually want. You know, if you take a 3-year-old and you stand them in front of their clothes closet and there's 20 pairs of, 20 outfits there, say, it's not that pleasant for the child to have to pick. If you throw 3 things on the bed and say pick one, they're pretty happy about that because they get some choice, but it's constrained. And, people say they want to be free, but that's just complete nonsense, because you run into paralysis of will with an infinite degree of freedom. You want a certain amount of freedom, but not that much. And you sort of want it when you want it. In my marriage and in my relationship with my children and in my clinical practice, you have to negotiate. That's what men and women have to do. And so I talk about that particularly in chapter 3 of my new book, which is Don't Hide Things in the Fog. It's like, well, let's talk about sex, for example. That's a good one. There's a stumbling block in a relationship. Let's talk about sex. Well, that's hard. People don't do it. They're they'll have sex, they'll engage in sexual acts, but they won't represent them abstractly and discuss them. So, well, how often should we have sex? Well, how are you going to solve that problem? Well, first of all, each person has to admit how often they'd like to have sex. They might be uncomfortable with that right off the bat. They might not even know, because they're so uncomfortable about it, they never even asked themselves. And then you have to ask yourself, well, what will I do if I don't get that? And people don't like that question either, because it means, well, you're going to get bitter and you're going to get resentful and you're going to get mopey and whiny and you're going to justify having an affair or at least looking elsewhere. And you don't want to admit that about yourself, so you won't have the damn discussion. Like, as soon as you know that you're flawed deeply, and if you're sexually frustrated, you're more likely to stray, well, then you can be afraid of yourself enough to overcome the fear to have the conversation. It's like, look, woman, if we don't make love 3 times a week, I'm so whiny and immature that I'm going to go to strip bars, and that doesn't work out well for our relationship. And, and she might say, well, why don't you grow the hell up? And, I'm so overworked. I have 50-hour-a-week work week because I'm a lawyer, and I have 3 small kids, and they're clamoring for my attention. And my goddamn husband is such a miserable wretch that he threatens me with, marital disintegration if I don't pull out another 4 hours a week to please him. It's like, fair enough. Those are 2 good arguments. And who the hell wants to have that discussion? But my sense is it's tyranny, slavery, or negotiation. And I've walked couples through this process many times. And I have some, rules of thumb, which I've got kind of a kick out of the critical response to the book. And it's been sort of universally, this controversial man is very banal. It's like, look, guys, get your insults lined up here.
Yeah.
Which one is it? Well, or unless I've managed to elevate banality to the level of controversy, which perhaps is the hallmark of a good self-help book. In any case, my observation of couples has been that they have to spend about 90 minutes a week in practical discussions about their joint life, the kids, the household economics, their plans for the future, all of that. And they need to carve out 2 or 3 times a week in a relatively established relationship to have a date. And chapter 11 is that in my book. Oh, no, it's chapter 10. Plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. It's like you have wants, she has wants. Negotiate about everything. Who's going to set the table? Who's going to do the dishes? Who's going to clean the leaves out of the gutter? Who does what? And because you either default to traditional sex roles, or you engage in a battle of resentful stubbornness, or you negotiate. And to negotiate, you have to look and see how little and stupid you actually are. And you notice, oh, I'm actually annoyed when I have to do the dishes. Who wants to admit that? It's like, well, why? Well, because I'm kind of macho, and that's sort of woman's work, maybe. I mean, who knows what the reason is? Maybe you're just lazy. Maybe your mother used it as a punishment. God
He's
only knows.
describing both of
Yeah,
us in
yeah.
one. You've described both of us in one sentence. He's lazy, I'm a bit macho.
Well,
There we
it's
go.
hard to negotiate unless you
Yeah.
know how little you are. It's like, really, that matters to you? It's like, yeah. And then I've noticed in my clinical practice, these little things aren't little. You know, you have to clean up the dishes 3 times a day for the rest of your life. It's like 5% of your life. Cleaning up the dishes. It's 5% of your waking life. How you're greeted at the door. You know, all these tiny things that make up day-to-day domesticity defines the relationships between men and women. That has to be negotiated. And to negotiate, you have to start out little and demanding. And then listen. And you know, my experience in my marriage has been with mutual goodwill and the commitment to radical honesty, negotiation succeeds. It's hard, but it succeeds. And that's been true under even extremely trying circumstances. And so, and I always look at the micro situation. It's like, well, I don't know how to regulate relationships between men and women in the workplace. I don't even think an answer to a question like that is possible. How do you treat your wife? How do you treat your daughter? Or perhaps how do you treat your female workers, the females that you work with? You can address these issues at that level, and that's where we have to start, as far as I can tell. And I think that's another reason why the activist types don't like me. It's like, I'm not much for social engineering. Start local, man. That's where the action is.
Yeah, and look, we've got a couple just questions wrapping up.
Sure.
My final question for you is, you've talked about your critics and the social activist types and all the rest of it. What do you think is the most legitimate criticism that people make of you?
Talk too much, probably. That might be it. I mean, I've been trying to stop doing that when I'm interviewing people on my YouTube channel. Other legitimate criticisms. Well, people are quite skeptical of, you know, this comes out quite often. I've had this problem. I took benzodiazepines, sort of, it's a complicated story. I had my reasons. I was very ill when I first started to take them. I had terrible insomnia. And I started taking them, and they were prescribed. I just kept taking them. And that ruined my life. It destroyed my life. And I still haven't recovered. I maybe recovered 10%, something like that. It's absolutely dreadful. I write self-help books. It's like, get your act together before you change the world. You know, that's my advice. So, you know, do I have my act together? Well, I certainly appear to have made a mistake. I mean, I've gone over it with a fine-tooth comb. I was genuinely distressed beyond my capacity to tolerate when I went to see the doctor. As far as I could tell, you know, I was basically sleepless for about a 3-week period. You know, maybe I had micro sleeps during that time, but the subjective experience was a 21-day long day. I was freezing cold. I couldn't pile on enough blankets to stay warm. I fainted every time I stood up. I was like completely frozen with terror. It was terrible. I don't know what happened. And I went to the doctor, and he gave me benzodiazepines. And so I took, and sleeping pills. I only used the sleeping pills a couple of times. I used these benzodiazepines, and 2 a day. And that cured the insomnia. And it was a very stressful period of my life, and much stress followed. And I just kept taking them. I was paying attention to other things. I never gave it a second thought, really. Well, that turned out to be a mistake. And then the question is, you make a mistake like that, eh? And you think, what does that signify? You make a mistake. Does that mean that, you know, you're flawed to the core as a character? Maybe. That's certainly possible. It's one possible truth. So how do I, you know, I was terrified when I wrote this second book, because I thought, well, first of all, it might be met by a really harsh reception, because I've invalidated my claims to any credibility with what's happened in my life. but that didn't happen. People seemed to be forgiving remarkably, and then I guess I was protected in my own defense. I would say I was protected against that sort of criticism to some degree because I never pretended that I was writing the rules only for other people. I believe that that's evident in my lectures and my writing, is that I'm talking to me too, you know. I'm in the crowd of reprehensible degenerates that need some work. And so, I mean, if they weren't relevant to me, well, how could I even write about them in any realistic sense? So I'm, you know, among the great unwashed who are clearly in need of a little bit of cleaning up and polishing. And so, and that seems to be how the public is responding. You know, I read my comments on YouTube and I take them seriously, and the reviews, the public reviews, I don't take the critical reviews seriously because that ship has sailed. You know, I could write the reviews before I see them. I know what people are going to say because that decision's already been made, and some collective decision's already been made. So what I hope people can listen to what I say and read what I read, and they can try it out for themselves. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't, sorry, you know.
Jordan, as comedians, we face some of this, the critical reviews. I remember someone told me very early on, he said the story about a critic talking to an artist, and the critic says, would you like to hear my opinion about your work? And the artist says, yes, go ahead. And the critic says, it's worthless. And the artist says, I know, but tell me anyway. I found that a useful approach.
You know, I know why there are critics. Like, things need to be criticized because there's too many things. So you have to rank order them so you know what to attend to. And there's justifiable criticism, I suppose, and unjustifiable criticism. I think one of the things I have detected, you guys can tell me what you think about this, is I note in my critics' reviews of my work the same contempt for the audience I'm trying to communicate with that drives the populism that the same elites cannot understand. It's like, because there's this snarky undertone constantly. Well, he's delivering pseudo-intellectual banalities to reprehensible, you know, to the reprehensible unsuccessful. It's like, well, that attitude is exactly what makes you so well liked. You know, and I don't have that attitude. I'm thrilled to see the people who come to see my shows, and I don't feel like I'm lecturing down. I never do that. You know, I'm always lecturing at the edge of my ability and assuming that my audience will follow along. And this is something, I think this is something that I've always felt that the people who have written about me have missed the story, really. They're not interested in why what I'm doing has this broad impact. And the reason it has a broad impact is because it's helpful to people. And so that says something about what it means to be helpful. And there's something really interesting there, but there's something about that kind of help that's viewed with contempt. And I think it is the contempt that drives this anti-elitism. It's not, and that stumps the left so badly. It's like, well, why do the right-wingers vote for Trump, for example? Well, it's because they don't like you. They don't like you. Why? Because you hold them in contempt. With all your talk of compassion. It's like, well, I feel sorry for them. Well, that's contempt.
And on that note, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Well, the last question we always ask is, what's the one thing we're not talking about as a society, but we really should be?
Well, you know, we don't have much of a view of what we want to do. And this is a real issue. It's like, when I was a kid in the 60s, there was this I read a lot of science fiction. There's this sort of technological utopia that beckoned. And everyone was caught up in it, post-war period. The better future. Well, we seem to have exhausted that, the power of that in some fundamental way. Where are we headed? And why? In some positive manner. We're really stuck on that. No political party seems to be able to formulate it. And so, what kind of world are we trying to create and why? That's what we should be talking about.
I couldn't agree with you more, Jordan. Thank you so much for your time, and you've been very generous with it. I obviously advise everybody to get the book Beyond Order. And next time you are in London, which I hope you are, we wish you a continued speedy recovery. But when you are next in London, we'd love to have you here on
I'd
the
love
set
that.
and continue
I
the
love
conversation.
London. I love Great Britain. It was so wonderful to visit there. It was great. Such a great country.
And we look forward to seeing you back here, Jordan. All the very best to you. And thank you guys for watching and listening at home. We will see you very soon with another interview. All of them go out 7 p.m.
Absolutely. See you soon, guys, and take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this incredible interview. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell button so that you never miss another fantastic episode.
And if you believe that the work we do
This is Todd.
Hi.
This is Todd's mom.
Hi.
In a moment, Todd's mom.
I was obliged to find another illustrator for Beyond Order. And I decided with my team, my daughter and my family members, actually mostly in discussion, to run a contest online and solicit drawings. I thought that would be entertaining and interesting and perhaps allow someone an opportunity that they might not otherwise have obtained. And so we received hundreds and perhaps even thousands of illustrations, of proposed illustrations. Do you remember, Yulia, did I ask for the illustration of a rule or more than one rule? Was that how the contest ran?
No, I know exactly what you asked. You asked for one rule, first rule, and you asked for line drawing.
So it was a first rule line drawing, right? Because we needed something that would work well in black and white. It's a tricky thing to produce a illustration for a book because whoever's doing the illustration has to know enough about printing to ensure that the illustration prints well, can be reproduced well in print format. And so anyways, we looked through a lot of artists' illustrations, and Yulia's stood out. And I think that the contest was, in consequence, very successful. I'm very pleased with the illustrations. I think they have a interesting fairy tale quality to them, a kind of classic fairy tale quality to them, a Victorian quality as well, which seemed appropriate to the content of the material. And so anyways, we received Yulia's entries and then worked with her over, well, the contest was run it was March of 2020?
March, yep.
March.
A year ago.
Yes, and a very tumultuous year, which is part of the reason we haven't met. The pandemic lockdown, of course, has kiboshed any plans we might have had to get together. You're based in New York, correct? Yes, and so under normal circumstances, I'm going to New York fairly frequently, but of course haven't been there for, it's got to be at least 2 years now. So I'd like to find out some things about you. So
I think I can.
I think I can.
I think I can. I think I can. I think I can.
How do we ensure families facing food insecurity get access to their food?
We needed to make sure that if they couldn't get to the food would come to them. We can deliver for food banks and schools. Amazon knows how to do that. I've helped deliver 12 million meals to families in need. That's the power of having a company like Amazon behind me.
The first is, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? And I'd like to know a little bit about your life.
Okay, so I was born in Riga, Latvia. One of the trio. There is Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, Baltic countries. We were the mix of Poland and Germany, I would say. And the old city was built by German. But I lived in the area where I was the only Jew. I'm Jewish. I was the only Jew, and the rest of the people were all Russians. There were no Latvians at all. And you would see in movies 9-story buildings built like dominoes. It's all dominoes, concrete. I hated it.
I saw a lot of that in Moscow.
It's
endless,
terrible.
an endless vista of 20-floor high apartments stretching as far as the eye can see in every direction.
Yeah.
Yes, a very unwelcoming architectural manifestation, I would say. Cold and harsh.
Exactly. And I was young enough to go outside of this neighborhood. If I were 15 or 16, I would be able to start going outside and going alone into the old city, into cafes, which we had, but I couldn't. So let's go back. So I had a talent for music. My mom was a music teacher. And I had a perfect pitch, luckily. So they tested me and they said, I'm perfect for conservatory. I was 7. They put me in a music conservatory. Obviously, no normal kid would choose something like that for their life. It was vicious. It was Latvian training combined with Russian training, what you would see in chess clubs. It was vicious.
So tell us about that. So was that a residential school or were you still living at home?
I was still living at home.
You're still living at home. And how many hours a day would you spend at school and practicing?
So 7. When I was 7, I went to a regular school and to a music school. It's 2 different places. I had to travel by tramway. Tramway is something you see in San Francisco.
A tram.
Yeah.
Yeah. Streetcar.
3 or 4 stops, not far away. I had twice in a week of a class, 2-hour class, and I had to practice every day at home for at least an hour. And that was my life. I also draw, which was a side project. It wasn't taken seriously by anyone, by me.
Your music was taken seriously by you and your parents and the
my parents and everybody around me and kids in school, and I was known as a musician.
And did you take any pleasure in that? Was music good for you, or what?
No,
no.
How come? It was horrible. It was I was good at it, but I blame the teachers and I blame the school because they would prepare kids for orchestras. They would just process talented kids for orchestras. There was no love of music involved at all. It's something you saw in Jane Eyre. The teachers of Jane Eyre, intimidating place. That was a music school. And we were playing classical music only for 7 years. It was a classical training. And I found that living somebody else's tragedy. It was very sad. The music was sad and was not for me. So by the end of 3rd year, I said, I can't do it anymore. I had a crash. I was on the floor crying. And my parents tried to convince me. Nothing worked. So my father said, he took the liberty of saying, he'll get me a puppy when I finish the school. And I finished the school. It was 1991.
And so how many more years did you go after that event?
After that, 4 years.
So you worked 4 years for your puppy.
Yeah,
Did you get him?
no.
Oh, ouch.
Because I finished it in 1991 when Soviet collapsed and we had to
Uh-huh.
leave the country.
Right. So geopolitical restructuring got in the way of your pet.
Yeah, and we left to Israel within
So
a
in
year.
91, your family left to Israel. And why did you choose to leave? Why did your family choose to leave in 1991?
The Soviet collapse. We left at 1992. The collapse was in 1990.
Right.
It took us time, so we lived through bad times in Latvia. Bad times in terms of food or anything really. There was no food.
Yeah, people don't know a lot about that post-Soviet period in the West. You know, I have my son-in-law is Russian. I think he's about your age.
Younger.
He has some pretty harrowing stories of early 1990s Moscow, being afraid to go to school, not knowing if he was going to come home alive.
Yeah.
Rough. It was a very rough period, lawless and chaotic period by his account. And for you, you said food shortages.
Yeah, my father stored potatoes and tuna for a year. That's what all we ate because there was nothing on the shelves, nothing.
And how did you come across the tuna and the potatoes?
And you have to ask my father.
Okay, I see.
I don't know. I wasn't involved in his decisions, and he stored it in a very cool place underground, in someone's garage, I think. And bread was by ticket. I remember staying in line for an hour to get a piece of bread. We had tickets. You could only get one bread for 3 days, I think. I could be mistaken. Only one piece of bread. There were two choices of bread in Russia throughout Soviet Union: white bread and rye bread, nothing else. So I was standing for an hour and people were spitting and angry, and I was a little girl, but I got this bread and I'm running home and my mom is cutting the bread and it's green, completely green inside. So that was my life until 14. Then we left to Israel.
And did you encounter, you said that you were the only Jewish family, or you said you were the only Jewish family in the entire area?
In the neighborhood. But
and did you encounter prejudice because of that, or was that an invisible?
Of course, I was bullied to hell.
And so was that a part of the decision to go specifically to Israel?
Yes. And we had no other choices. Germany was close to us, America was close to us. That was the only choice. We didn't know anything about Israel. It seemed like a nice place. From where I was very happy because I felt captive for 14 years. I was trying to escape this place in any case, in any price.
How large was your family? You have siblings?
So most of my family was killed during the Holocaust. 40 people. They just brutally killed everybody. And a very small portion left, they survived. And that's why I'm here. I have one brother.
And so your mom and dad and you and your brother lived in this apartment building in Riga?
Yes.
How big was the apartment that you and your brother and parents lived in?
What they consider in America, it's one-bedroom apartment. It's one room for us and a living room for my parents.
All right. So you moved to Israel in 92?
92.
And how old were you then?
14.
14. And how long did your family spend in Israel?
My family is still living there.
Your family's still there?
Yes.
So was that an improvement?
No, not for me. For everybody else. Everything seemed to be improving for everybody else but me. I couldn't find my place. I was always not at home until I came to New York.
And things have worked out for you in New York?
Absolutely.
Well, that's good. So it's obvious that you're capable of finding a place. It just took a while. So what happened to you in Israel? Why do you think you had difficulty there?
First of all, we came with no language. Second of all, I came from Europe to Middle East. So it's a matter of mentality. I just couldn't get it. I just couldn't be part of it. And we lived in a very poor area, very poor area.
What did your parents do in Israel? How did they keep How did they make
well,
ends meet?
So my dad he was an engineer and he started working in some factory. My mom was working at nights in a bakery. It was tough.
So they could find employment, but it was
It was tough. Yeah, I started working when I was 15. I've collected oranges.
So you moved, how old were you when you arrived in Israel?
I was 14, almost 15.
Right. So that tends to be a relatively tumultuous time in a girl's life anyways, those teenage years and you couldn't speak you couldn't speak
I
Hebrew
couldn't speak for 2 years.
for 2 years.
Yep. Others could speak 3 months. Just listening, just being on the street, they could speak. It's not how my brain works. I had to collect it for 2 years and I couldn't get out anything of my mouth. And that's the problem I have with languages in general.
Yeah, well, that definitely sounds difficult. So when did you move to New York? How old were you when you moved to New York?
So in Israel, I stayed for 9 years. I've been in the army, which is a separate subject to talk about. Then I finished 2 years of art school, which was 3 years, but I only finished 2. And then I was offered by the head of our department, I was offered a job in her private studio. So I just drop out.
I see. So, and that was, you went to art school and that was on the basis of your prowess in visual art?
Yeah, it was my dad's idea.
And had you stopped playing the piano by this time?
Oh, I didn't play piano from the moment I arrived to Israel.
And have you played it since?
I've started to play in New York. That was the first thing I bought.
Oh, and have you been able to take any pleasure in that?
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. So that's a happy ending to that story. I mean, it's very rough it can be very rough learning any sophisticated skill because the learning period is often not particularly rewarding. There's so much you have to get by rote. I mean, when kids learn to read, they have to be able to read phrases and perhaps even sentences at something approximating a glance before they take much pleasure in the reading. And so there's this initial period of rather painful apprenticeship that isn't necessarily accompanied by intrinsic pleasure and meaning. But if you can get through that, if you're lucky, then once you have the discipline, you can enjoy the skill. And I'm glad to hear that worked out for you. Are you a good pianist?
I'm good. I just stopped playing classical music. I was not meant to be.
And what music do you play and what music do you enjoy?
Rock, pop, jazz, anything but.
Right, so you have a modern sensibility musically.
Yep.
What about bands? Who do you like?
Oh, and there is a reason for that. My dad bought me a recorder for cassettes, 2 cassette player. That was, I was 11 or 12 max. And 2 cassettes came along with it. One was Queen and another Billy Joel.
Which Queen album?
I wish I remembered.
Was it A Night at the Opera? Did it have Bohemian Rhapsody on it?
I think so, yeah.
That's A Night at the Opera. That's definitely their best album.
Yeah, and that's the first thing I listened to. Mm-hmm. And I remember just sleeping next to it. My player was here. I couldn't do anything else. I was possessed. I was obsessed, completely obsessed. I've never heard or seen anything as beautiful. There was no beauty in my life. It was all monochrome. Everything was black and white in this area. For me.
Yes,
there was no color. Physically, there was no color. Even the clothes were all black or dark brown or dark blue.
What are winters like in Riga?
Cold. Minus 20 Celsius is the coldest, I remember. And we had to go to school. I remember that.
So you moved alone to New York? Okay, so let's go back. You said that you went to art school on the basis of your talent as a visual artist, despite the fact that wasn't something that you really had concentrated on with regards to training. You were trained
Sure.
as a child, as a musician, not as a visual artist.
Sure.
How did you pick up that talent?
I was the best in the class. How did I pick it up? First of all, I didn't want to go to school of graphic arts because of computer training. I said, I'm never going to touch this thing. Technology, I can't. I'll never acquire something like that. That's too much of a skill, and technology is not for me. So they said, first year, you'll only have to draw by hand. Everything we're gonna do by hand, no computer involved. And they bought me. They bought me completely with that. So first year, everything we've done was drawing.
And you had to submit a portfolio, I presume, as a condition of admittance.
Yes.
And you'd been drawing on your own.
Yes.
Did your parents support that, or were they opposed to it, or was it
My parents
neutral?
supported
They
everything
supported
I've
it.
done. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and they didn't see that as something that
No,
took
my
away
parents
from
are
your studies?
musicians. They were the hipsters of the area, considered the hipsters. They were the free spirits. The art was supported.
And how much time did you spend drawing when you were a kid?
A lot. I was not just drawing, I was making mosaics.
Out of?
Mosaics.
Out of what?
Out of wooden, colorful, different shaped. And what you had to do is just imagine what you want to build and just go for it. From the center, outside. And the size I've built it, it was the size of almost a small rug. It was that big of a bag. And I would spend 2-3 hours. It was a blessing.
So then you went to art school and you spent the first year drawing by hand, and that was okay. You were afraid of technology or loath to use it. So that was what happened in the second year.
I just grasped it. I just went along with it.
And so you learned to use,
Completely fine.
you became fluent with the use of computers then.
Better than everybody else.
So what do you think made you believe to begin with that you weren't able to do it, or that you weren't suited for it?
I'm just afraid of technology.
Well, you should be. Everybody should be afraid of technology, but it's still probably better to know how to use it. I think you should be less afraid of it, perhaps, if you know how to use it. It's very powerful. I mean, technology has disrupted my life in a manner that is absolutely not only inconceivable, but perhaps irrecoverable. But anyways, it's brought many benefits as well, but it's so powerful. You're taking a tiger by the tail, or perhaps something much bigger than a tiger. So
Just playing dragons.
yeah, or maybe they're eating you. It depends. So, all right. So you learned, you became a sophisticated technology user your second year of art school. So, what advantages and disadvantages were there to bringing computer technology to your artistic endeavors?
Photoshop is a unique thing. I would never be able to layer up layers the way I do, or imagine things the way I imagine before I start. I don't think of graphics in terms of non-Photoshop anymore.
But it's an unbelievably powerful program. It's like
Yes.
a factory. Photoshop. There's no limit to what you can do with an image. It's kind of a terrifying program in some sense, because it can, if you're the least bit obsessive, it can pull you in and trap you forever, because there's no limit to the number of variations you can produce. And I mean, I'm a rather amateur Photoshop user. I've used it a fair bit, but I certainly haven't explored all of its capabilities. You could spend a lifetime doing that.
Absolutely. I hope doing that.
That's your lifetime.
That's my goal.
So, okay, so you finished 2 years of art school, and then you were offered a position by the director of the program,
Yes.
and that was still in Israel.
Yeah.
And what did she or he,
That was a she. And
what did she have you doing, and what did she think about your decision to stop going to art school to take your job?
She noticed me. And she came to a graduation, and we had a final project. She was there the whole time, and after the final project, she said, "Can I speak to you?" And I thought, I'm in trouble. And she offered me because, first of all, I spoke Russian and she had a client. And second of all, I was good. That's what she told me. I had no idea. I didn't believe anything she said. I was completely living outside of myself at that point.
What do you mean, living outside of yourself?
It's hard to describe. I couldn't fit into Israel.
Right.
I felt too large in that place. And nobody knew what I'm speaking about.
So how long did you work for her?
For 4 months. Backing up, when I was 15, I met a boy on the street. It was 2 weeks after I arrived. And that boy is my husband right now. So he left to New York in 2000, and I followed him.
I see. And so, was that what stopped you from continuing the job?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
That's exactly what stopped me. His leaving, his departure was devastating.
When he departed, had you two planned to meet up again in New York? Was that the eventual
No, that
plan?
was the end. He left.
Ah. And what changed?
He stayed here for 3 months. He called me and he said, I'm seeing people and I don't see them. They aren't transparent. I'm just looking through them. I don't see any of them. You need to come because I see you.
And so you uprooted yourself from Israel? How old were you?
I was 23. Again, no English, no language. All I had is ABC. Again, the same story, just this time I came alone.
But you liked New York?
Not right away. Not right away. It was tough. It was tough in the beginning, and we had a first child a year later. I would describe my life as 40 years in the desert. That's exactly what it was. 40, even more, 42.
How old are you now?
43.
Ah, so that's not many years out of the desert.
No, it's just the beginning.
All right, so you're in New York and you're learning to speak English. You're newly married. You have a new child.
Yes, and again, 2 to 3 years it took me to start speaking, and I wouldn't just the words would scatter around my head. I would just not be able to find them. They're always hiding behind. There's a field, and I know they're there, but they hiding behind the rocks. It's very complicated. It's very hard for me to speak because words, I see words. I don't hear words. For me, words are pictures, and I memorize them. And when they are in the sentence, I'm being able to reread. That's why it was so good for me that we corresponded, because I could reread and I could understand exactly what you meant. And then
So did you work when you arrived in New York? Did you work as an artist?
right away,
You
they
did. You
fired
found,
me. Yeah.
how did you find work? It's hard to find work as an artist. So how did you manage that?
I thought I'm gonna clean the restrooms. I was walking around looking for Orthodox schools or schools just to clean the bathrooms. That's what I thought I'm gonna do. 2 weeks passed and I went to photo developing studio. We had some photographs. It was the winter. It was beautiful. I came there and the guy before me wanted to make some retouchment on his old pictures. And the guy in front of me at the desk said, yes, we do that, but it's gonna take us a month. Come back to us in a month. So I'm getting to the desk and I'm saying, I can do it in 1 hour, maybe less. He said, I don't believe you. Let me try. He sat me down and he had a drawer with probably 10 pictures that was supposed to take him a month to retouch. And I've done it in 1 day. He said, I have somebody in mind. It was a Jewish guy. Obviously, they had somebody in mind in New Jersey, which is far. That's how I got my job. And I stayed there for 13 years.
And so tell me about this place. Oh, it was a photo studio.
No, he
No.
called his friend, obviously, and he had friends in graphics. He
I
knew
see.
more than that. There was a catalog company It was creating catalogs for mostly jewelry, but not only. Mostly jewelry, which is the hardest thing because retouching of jewelry is the hardest thing. And we had everything. We had a printing facility under our roof in the same building. We had our photographers. We had me. So everything was going on. I was on top of everything. He made me an art director, and I was an art designer and art director. And the company closed up in 2016. It was 5 years ago.
And you managed that. Was your English functional by that point, or?
I wouldn't say so. No. We didn't need to speak a lot. He learned to trust me. Within a year, he just knew that everything I do is gonna be lovable, and he knew I'm always right. He just figured it out. Just do that, just do this. I worked 3 days a week, which was amazing. I got my salary for a week. I had 2 boys by that time, and I got sick.
Oh, what happened?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm still not sure what happened. I was always sick. I relapsed and I was destined to stay home. So I stayed home, and there was one choice: either I should suffer from pain or I should do something while I'm suffering from pain. And that was the only thing that made me disappear. I forget about the reality. That's the only thing, my Photoshop. And I've started doing graphics for no reason.
Okay, so
It's not-
when did this happen? So you got too ill to work? Was that the case? You got too ill to work, and so you were staying at home? When did that happen?
5 years ago.
5 years ago. So
I'm skipping.
that's okay. We should move towards the discussion of the drawings, anyways. But we're getting close to the present day. So you became ill about 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and did you have to
Very
stop?
ill. No,
You had-
I was ill, but I became very ill. I didn't think I will survive it. So
And I don't want to press you any more than is comfortable
I
for
couldn't
you.
walk.
But
I had no energy at all.
uh-huh.
Zero. And I had 2 kids.